On the night of January 30th, 1933, 18-year-old Kurt Messerschmidt was on a streetcar returning home after attending a theater performance in Berlin.
At about 11 p.m., the streetcar had to come to a stop. All the streets in a very large section of Berlin were cordoned off, and I soon could see what was happening. First I heard the marching steps of people carrying torches. I realized those were Nazis who, in their brown shirts, celebrated their coming to power on that fateful day. We had to get off the streetcar and had to try to find our way home using all kinds of detours, and it took much longer than it would have normally taken. I reached my home at about 5 minutes before midnight, and I rushed to a little radio, and while I was listening, immediately being captivated by the voice I had been listening to for years, it was cut off very abruptly at the stroke of 12, midnight, and immediately followed the voice of this devilish propaganda minister, Joseph Goebbels. And at that point I felt my whole life, together with the life possibly of the world, took a turn around.
It was very frustrating, especially being told you're a guest when you were born in a place and didn't know any other place. And it was very confusing to a child of 10 or 11 to be told you don't belong when you never belonged anywhere else.
Why did I survive? I'm here today. I live today. I am aware of a past, and I'm happy it is a past. What we have to do is, if anything, this would put a tremendous obligation on myself. And it was obvious that I had to find out, or I had to make sure that my survival was not just a quirk of fate, but a fate that demanded a positive response on my part. At the end of those death marches, especially of my own experience, we arrived in the city of Traunstein near the Austrian border. We were more or less living, or hardly living, corpses. All power had left us, all strength, and we were just dragging ourselves, being unable to communicate with each other or speak to each other. April 30th, 1945. It was obviously close to the end of the war. We heard American planes and American tanks roll by, and the SS became uneasy. They had been killing all the way anybody who walked out of line or tried to steal something in a field. This killing had stopped. Near evening, we arrived at Traunstein, and I saw a little building with this with a low opening door, I saw pigs being driven out of this stable, a pigsty. We were 66 people left from a group of about 900. These 66 were pushed into this pigsty. The stench didn't bother us. Our sense of smell had left us long ago. The dirt is something we were used to. And so we were forced into this dark, dirty hole. The SS guard stayed at the entrance with the dog and with his arms. And during the night, I realized this was the end of the road. And I'm grateful to this day that my mental capacity was not completely gone. So I could do some thinking. I had to make decisions, and I made one. I got up and stepped over people, some of them might have been already dead, to this entrance door and passed by the SS guard, speaking to him in perfect German. It wasn't easy to speak because I hadn't spoken for days. So I brought out some words indicating that I would like to go to the bathroom or something of that sort, but in perfect German. I knew that his shooting days were over. And I knew with a certainty I had never experienced before that he would not kill me. And at that moment of extreme faith, something told me, go ahead, you will be safe. Fresh snow was on the ground on May 1st, 1945, so I couldn't cover, and it didn't bother to cover my tracks. My exterior appearance was such that there was no way to hide who I was. This pigsty was at the edge of a forest, and I walked into that forest, never turning around. 3 days later, I reached an inn. The innkeeper, an Austrian, took me in. And in the middle of the night, I was awakened by wild shooting. I wasn't sure whether I had been awakened or whether I was still dreaming, because I was used to the sound of shooting and fighting. So I listened for 5 or 10 minutes, and then I just assumed this was it and went back to sleep. Next morning, I found out the horrible truth. After I had isolated myself from the group of 64, 2 hours later, the SS left. They actually fled. And these 64 people were left to themselves. And townspeople later described the scene to me, which was moving to them. These 64 walked out of this messy place, clung together, were singing some songs, possibly of a religious nature, of their homelands. There were people from all over Eastern Europe, and marched together into their newly regained freedom. And that night, when I heard the shooting, they had arrived at a big farm. After knocking at the door, they saw that there were Ukrainian SS inside, who only had to see Briefly, the striped uniforms and the shorn heads, all they did, mowed all of them down on the spot. This was the shooting I had heard the night before. I should have been one of them. The experience was even more strange after I learned that of the 64, 62 went to this place where they were murdered, and 2 others went in a different direction, and they had the same fate. They also were shot, and I was the only one who survived.